a very short overview. Essentially, you're going to utilize the Galaxy Zoo data set to create your own research question and hypothesis, go through and carry out the data analysis, interpret your results, and reflect upon it. So the end product is going to be a 4-minute video summarizing your group experience. Now, as I said, there's multiple milestones through here, so I can sort of check on your process and provide feedback, all of that stuff. So the very first one, the milestone that'll be due for this week, is the guided research activity. And just to show you some things, here's essentially what will be due each week moving forward. So the 5th thing that's not posted yet is you're going to peer review other groups' videos, and I can't post that until you all have submitted the videos. So that one will show up the very last week. And it'll be but the rubric and all of that for you to go through and peer review them will be, actually you can see it within this document. So there is a lot of information that you should read through before you do your guided research activity in this introduction to Galaxy Zoo. So it'll give you more information about some of the items that you'll be able to find in the Galaxy Zoo dataset and how to access it. Talks a little bit more about the Galaxy classification, some of which you've already done. It talks about how the crowdsourcing works, and there's more information in this link if you want to go through and do that. And then it starts talking a little bit more about some of the science and what they were able to get out of Galaxy Zoo, what the different parameters they've measured are. And there's also a lot of external resources if you want to go search and learn more about some of this stuff as well. So to the actual items that you're going to do, again, this week is the guided research activity. So the Galaxy Zoo data sheet is linked here. You'll again want to make your own copy because that way you don't modify anyone else's. And you're going to go through and calculate a few items so you can start to get a feel for what's going on in here. And there are some questions that you're going to answer at the end. So once you go through and make some calculations, this is going to walk you through some of the ways to visualize your data using things like histograms, like what we did in the original Zoo Tools activity. And then there is an actual assignment submission that you're going to want to go through and do. In milestone 1, you'll work through an introductory activity which will guide you in starting your research experience. So this activity should be done individually. However, later activities you'll be able to start working as a group if you so choose. In milestone 1, you'll be provided with a research question. The research question is, are all spiral galaxies blue and all elliptical galaxies red? So you learned a little bit about galaxies during some of the earlier Galaxy Zoo activities. And now we're going to further investigate their properties. So in order to try and answer this research question, milestone 1 is going to guide you through various specific steps to utilize the Galaxy Zoo dataset to try and answer this question. So you'll want to go through and examine this in 2 different ways. So we have steps within the research project student instructions that you'll work yourselves through. There's lots of extra information in there. And then the milestone 1 guided research activity is what you'll actually submit that has specific questions for you to answer along the way. There'll be a separate video to sort of step you through some of this, so watch that when you're ready to actually start the activity. But the main goal in milestone 1 is to learn how to manipulate the Galaxy Zoo dataset. You will filter it. You will go through and create some visualizations, charts, scatter plots, things like that, histograms. You'll also go through and look at some statistics as part of your investigation with this, all in order to try and answer that research question that you were given. So this will model what we will expect you to go through and do when you come up with your own research question in milestone 2. So once you work yourself through all the steps for milestone 1, you'll want to make sure that you submit your guided research activity, including all of the questions, You'll also need to make sure that you submit a link to your spreadsheet so that I can go through and take a look at your statistics results and the histograms from the steps above. Milestone 2 will have you go through and come up with your own research question. So this will be done in your group that you choose to work with. First, working in your group, you'll want to go through and compare your results to the Milestone 1 guided activity. Did you all come to the same conclusions? If you didn't, you want to make sure you come to a consensus as a group. And if that means that one or more of your group members wants to resubmit their Milestone 1, now that they've learned more after discussing with their group members, you're welcome to do so. So in Milestone 2, you'll go through and start to think about what are you curious about learning more, utilizing the Galaxy Zoo data set. So again, this is all various types of data based on lots of galaxies that the Galaxy Zoo project has investigated. And your only constraints essentially are using this data set. So whatever research question you come up with, you're going to need to use the data set to try and answer that. So if you get feedback that asks, how are you going to utilize this data set to be able to answer your question, you'll need to be prepared to answer that in order to move forward and be able to move into Milestone 3. So you'll want to make sure that whatever question you come up with is something that can actually be answered utilizing that data set. So if your question has to do with Pluto, for example, Pluto has nothing to do with the galaxies in the Galaxy data set, and so that's not an appropriate research question for this particular project. While you're trying to think of a research question for you as an individual or you as a group, I really strongly advise that you follow the recommendations in the rubric for good research questions. So that's linked both here and on the side in the outline. So let's take a look at that. So if you've come up with a question and you want to see if it's a good research question, go ahead and ask yourself each of these questions. Is the research question stated clearly and easily understood? Does it show creativity and originality? Is it focused but not so narrow that the research ends up being limited? Is it broken into sub-questions if the umbrella question is too broad? Can it be researched with the data set, the tools, and the time that you have available? Will it lead to a study that's reproducible? So this is a very important piece of science. If whatever you do is not something that someone else could go through and do with the same tools and data that you have and get the same results, then that's a problem. And that's where a lot of the arguments in science come up from. So anything that you go through and do, you want to make sure is reproducible. If it's not, then it's kind of like magic. I came up with this when nobody has any clue how. That's not science. Science has to be reproducible. That's how we improve and understand and agree upon results. And lastly, does the question expand your thinking and your background knowledge? Are you going to be learning something from this question? You cannot utilize the same research question as the guided research activity. And in fact, really, I would recommend steering away from anything related to it, specifically related to color and spiral and elliptical galaxies, because that's really just too close to what you've already gone through and done. So you want to try and take a look at all of the different facets of the data set in order to try and see what might sound interesting to you. So back to the Milestone 2 instructions. So as I mentioned a moment ago, there are lots of columns in the data set that you didn't use in the guided research activity. Take a look at those, make sure you understand what they are, and maybe something in there will spark an idea in order to provide you with a good research question. The piece that you actually need to submit for this activity is a single document that contains the names of the people in your research group. If you're just working by yourself, then you can just say, I'm just working individually. It needs to include your research question. Make sure that you've vetted it against that rubric for good research questions to make sure that you think that it's a good research question. And lastly, what is your initial hypothesis? Since you have a research question, what do you think the answer to that question is? And you want to make sure you submit this before you go through and look at any of the data. You're going to do it based on your background knowledge and all the work that you've done so far. And it's okay if you find out that you're wrong. In fact, that's where most of the exciting science comes from. In going through and doing this activity in a previous term, I had a student come up with a research question, and as she was going through the data, the results from the data surprised me enough that I went and talked to some of my colleagues about it. So that was one student at Mount SAC that came up with a really excellent research question that I was struggling to try and explain myself. And that's really amazing. And you could definitely go through and do something like that too. So you just need to sort of see what sounds interesting to yourself and move forward from there. The third milestone is you're actually, now that you have a question, you're going to start creating some key plots, so some key visualizations. Some of them will be ones that you've created based on the Galaxy Zoo dataset itself. Some of them will be ones that you'll have identified from outside sources to essentially help support or explain what your research question is about. There are various different specific guidelines in terms of like adding captions that make sense. There is an example slide set with a few slides to show you sort of some format and structure. You don't necessarily have to do everything and make it exactly like that, but it gives you an idea of the types of information to go through and include in there. Milestone 4 is going to be making your video. So the idea of each of these milestones is that once you submit your research question, then I can provide some feedback for you. You use that feedback, you go and make your key plots, you share those with me, I provide feedback again, you use that to then make your video, since many of those key plots will be utilized in your video. So your video, and here are some specific things that need to be in that video. Again, 4 minutes, since this is going to be all for your classmates. They're the ones that are going to be viewing it. You don't have to explain what the Galaxy Zoo project is, or what galaxies are, or how to determine galaxy color, because you'll all have done that. But you do need to explain what you've learned, what you're trying to do, all of that type of stuff. And then again, there's a reflective piece as well. If you are not sure how you want to go through and record this video, you can utilize whatever you want, but one simple solution would be Screencast-O-Matic. It's free, and I think I've now set it up so that it links directly from Canvas. Many faculty right now are using that in the switch to online, so you may or may not be familiar with it. But of course, you can utilize whatever you want. For this milestone, milestone 4, you're going to submit your research video either as a video file of something that hopefully I can play, and I'll let you know if there's any problems, or if you want to upload it to something like YouTube or something else that has a URL associated with it, maybe use Dropbox and you know how to make a URL for a file that way, you can submit the URL as long as I can still access it, because I need to be able to download it. So if you do put it on YouTube, you need to set it so that it is downloadable by others. I don't think that that is a normal sort of setting in YouTube, so you're going to have to dig around and find that if you decide you want to use that. So then I will collect all the videos that are submitted together, make the peer review assignments, and that'll be done during finals week. So that is the whole guidelines in terms, so you know how you'll be graded for the final video. Down here at the bottom, there is a video rubric. So this is not only what you will use to grade, it's also what I will go through and use to grade the videos. And everyone does need to go through and do the 2 peer reviews. So there's, oh no, I guess that's just the one sheet. And these should already be posted in Canvas as the rubric for the videos. So you can see that that's what we'll go through and use for the project. So again, this is spread out over many weeks to hopefully give you lots of time. But if you and your group are proactive and want to start working quickly, then you have everything you need to go through and do that, again, except for the final peer review piece of it. And lastly, all of these milestones will provide feedback opportunities for you. So after your guided research activity, you'll have feedback upon that to make sure that you understand how to use the plots and examine the data properly. Ideally, before you go through and do your research question, you'll get feedback on the research question, which you want to make sure you utilize before you start working on your key plots in milestone 3. And you'll get feedback on your key plots in milestone 3, which you should make sure you take into account before you make your video in milestone 4. So everything is scaffolded. Make sure that you take the feedback that you get into account before you move on to the next stage. That's very important.